This is what so many people have been waiting for. Michael Saylor is now on the verge of possibly appearing here on Joe Rogan's podcast and speaking to millions of people, talking about Bitcoin. He has also just announced new Bitcoin purchases, making another move here. And there are actually indications that MicroStrategy and other Bitcoin treasury companies are secretly coordinating, conspiring to plan a Bitcoin squeeze. In other words, they want to trigger a sudden spike in the Bitcoin price. We're going to take a look at that. Now, we've had the 24th day in a row where Bitcoin is above 100,000 US dollars. We have the highest monthly close for Bitcoin ever. And yet there are still people who are firmly in the bear camp right now. I mean, there's uncertainty, like the new statements from Howard Lutnick and Scott Bessent here in the US, and also from China, which are adding more potential for conflict in the ongoing trade disputes. At the moment, things don't look like they're calming down. Instead, it seems like tensions are rising even further. We have Ross Ulbricht, who received a donation of 300 Bitcoin, and we'll take a look at the most important data for next week. It's going to be a really intense week. There are some very exciting things happening here. But first, leave me a like down below so Bitcoin can really take off. Yeah, the Bitcoin price is still struggling a bit. But hey guys, it's really not as bad as it looks. If we rise slowly here, we can climb much more steadily. Yeah, much more confidently than if we just have these parabolic breakouts. I keep saying this. A slow, steady rise is often better than just shooting straight up. That's what a lot of people really want to see. There are still all those people who are uncertain and write in the comments. So, when is the breakout coming? When is the breakout coming? Your videos always sound like Bitcoin should already be at 1 million here. I mean, we're already almost at all-time highs. And if we look at a 10-year or even a 5-year time frame, we basically have one giant Bitcoin God candle here. And we can see it too. The Bitcoin price has now been trading above the $100,000 mark for 24 days in a row. Highest monthly close of all time. This has never happened before with Bitcoin, that we've stayed above the $100,000 mark for so long. And I believe that every day we manage to hold steady above 100,000 now is bringing us exactly what we want in the long run. Namely, that we're creating the next base, the next bottom here at 100,000, where we have a really strong buyer base, making it very difficult for us to drop below that level again. I mean, in the very short term, it could absolutely happen that we drop below that level again. But in the long run, we should make sure that a massive base is being built here. And it really looks like that's what's happening, even if we're not immediately shooting up to 150 or 200,000. But as the Bitcoin therapist also says here, the next move is coming. We're currently loading up here. The next move that's coming will be really violent. So it's going to be very painful for a lot of people who are standing on the sidelines and are bearish. Don't let yourself get shaken out by the boredom we're seeing right now. We can also see that some media outlets might be deliberately spreading FED here, being manipulative, and so on, maybe not wanting to push Bitcoin as much as it actually deserves. Bitcoin isn't getting the attention it really deserves. And now we're also seeing more sources of unrest here, which are also preventing us from just powering straight through. For example, here the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent tells China that they are withholding products that are crucial for the US industrial supply chain. So this adds more tension to the whole conflict issue and, blames the Chinese here. Here we have the Trade Secretary Scott, not Scott Bessent, but Howard Lutnick, who says the tariffs will definitely not be lifted. Here he also makes it clear again, no, there will continue to be tensions here. And then we actually have China here, saying that the US is currently the biggest threat to regional peace and stability. That is, to regional calm and to regional stability and peace. And that's interesting, because the US says that China is the biggest threat to them, and China says that the US is the biggest threat. And we actually already had both sides kind of on the same page, but then things escalated somehow. And now it looks again like things really aren't heading in a good direction here. But let's listen in for a moment, before we get to Michael Saylor, to hear what Scott Bessent has to say in a new interview. Because things are getting very heated back and forth here. Here, he's interrupted by the reporter. He wants to talk about how well everything is going, but the reporter doesn't really buy it.
The inflation numbers last week were pro-consumer.
Right. So you listen to earnings calls just like we do. You know what Walmart's saying, what Best Buy's saying, and what Target are saying.
So know what Home Depot and Amazon are saying. I know what the South China Morning Post wrote within the past 24 hours, that 60% of the tariffs will likely be eaten by the Chinese producers.
The reality is there will either be less inventory or things at higher prices or both.
When we were here in March, you said there was going to be big inflation. There hasn't been any inflation. Actually, the inflation numbers are the best in 4 years. So why don't we stop trying to say this could happen and wait and see what does happen?
So here, he uses very strong words and definitely goes after the reporter, telling her that she promised really high inflation numbers, but nothing has happened, and now we should take a step back. That would also suggest that the Fed can relax a bit, that the Fed can lower interest rates, because the issue of inflation is off the table. There are just different viewpoints. For example, Scott Bessent believes that inflation is relatively under control. Donald Trump shares that view as well. But there are also many others, like Jerome Powell, for example, who still says there is a lot of uncertainty here. Tariffs can cause inflation data to escalate at any time, and everyone just has their own story. Feel free to write your story in the comments below, how you see the situation with inflation. I still view it quite critically, and in the long run, I really don't see any way around high inflation. Especially because sooner or later, the money printing press will kick in here as well. Oh, now I have the hiccups. Okay, next week we have some major events coming up, especially right on Monday when Jerome Powell will be speaking. That could also cause volatility. In the past, it has always been a factor for volatility. The only exception was his last speech, which didn't cause any volatility because he was just speaking at a university. We have various data coming up: job data, manufacturing data, then we have the non-farm payrolls, non-farm employment data, more job data, and another job report. It's a big week for the labor market, and labor market data is always relevant. So labor market data, inflation data, and interest rates. Those are always the key points that people, like macro analysts, focus on. Now let's take a look here. Michael Saylor is announcing 0 purchases, so I'm curious about that. The last purchase was a bit smaller again. I'm curious to see if this purchase will be bigger now. He says, orange is my favorite color. Feel free to write in the comments below what your favorite color is, and whether you're into orange like Michael Saylor. He often wears an orange tie, and it's just wild. He never takes it off. And the other companies that want to compete with him here, like Nakamoto and 21 Capital, in my opinion, it's going to be very, very difficult for these companies, because some of them, like Jack Mallers and David Bailey's, have said they want to catch up to MicroStrategy. But how are they supposed to do that if Michael Saylor keeps buying way more Bitcoin every week than they're currently accumulating? We see that the hash rate is at an all-time high, for example. That's a metric Max Kaiser always talks about. He says, for instance, hey guys, if you're worried about the price, just take a look at this chart here. The hash rate keeps going up to the moon, and that's the key. It's all about the hash rate. We only need to worry if this comes to an end, if it collapses and there's a crash here, because those are the people taking on the highest risk in the Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin miners. And as long as they're building up hash rate here, the network remains stable. But let's go back to Michael Saylor for a moment, because this is something that's truly fascinating. And now, seriously, hold on tight. Since November 1st, Strategy has been pushing through at a rate of 1,460 Bitcoin per day. Saylor has added over 300,000 Bitcoin in less than 200 days. No one else in the world can raise and deploy capital at this level. Not even close. And they're bearish. We really need to check out what's going on here. So, 450 Bitcoin are mined per day by the Bitcoin miners. And Michael Saylor is buying almost 3 times as many Bitcoin per day as are being mined. Guys, and there are still bears out there. You know, if the selling pressure lets up even a little bit, we're just going to go completely parabolic here. Look, Bitcoin Therapist is saying it here too. Pot candles are officially loading. With Michael Saylor, Joe Rogan is actually saying now, hey, let's talk about Bitcoin. And Joe Rogan has the most popular podcast in the world. I think it really is the biggest podcast out there. And he's asking here, who should be the guest? And a lot of people have written underneath, please invite Michael Saylor here. And there have already been tons and tons of requests for a long time. A lot of people also wanted Nayib Bukele. Michael Saylor even reached out himself, saying, hey, let's talk about Bitcoin. And in my opinion, this is a really exciting story that's happening here, because these are just the kind of catalyst effects we're seeing. Of course, Michael Saylor isn't Jesus or some miracle worker or anything like that, but he really does manage to bring Bitcoin more and more into the mainstream. And podcasts like this can even convince someone like Schnitzelpeter to start accumulating Bitcoin again, because instead of just listening to his usual 0 to 15 podcasts, suddenly Michael Saylor is sitting there as a guest. Although you have to say, Joe Rogan isn't exactly a super mainstream guy either. I mean, he does have a huge reach, but it's not like he only covers mainstream topics. Still, this is a way to reach people from the mainstream retail crowd even better. What was interesting was that Michael Saylor made another comment about GameStop. Their stock dipped a bit after they announced their Bitcoin treasury strategy. And he says here, the market probably wanted GameStop to buy even more Bitcoin. And he's calling on GameStop to buy another $5.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. That would make them the second largest Bitcoin treasury company after MicroStrategy. And that's, well, I'm really curious to see if anything else will happen, if GameStop will actually double down on Bitcoin, because some people were a bit disappointed. Honestly, I was a little disappointed too. I thought they were really going to go all out, but that's just how it is. We can see there's a difference between the Bitcoin companies that go all in on Bitcoin and those that only put 80 or 70% into Bitcoin. And it really makes a huge difference, because the market simply values it in such a way that only the companies that are fully committed to Bitcoin are truly rewarded by the market. What was also interesting was that Jason from the All In podcast, who is very critical of Michael Saylor and also of Bitcoin, is now actually talking about how Michael Saylor has a Bitcoin squeeze plan. Basically, a massive pump that's being prepared behind the scenes.
And if you look at his replies, if you scroll down, in his replies specifically, you'll see him saying other people should move their treasuries into Bitcoin. And Rumble's CEO said they're going to buy 20 billion. And then there's another company I'd never heard of that does Bitcoin mining. That now they're also selling loans or trying to, do this convertible debt into Bitcoin. So I think what's happening here is they're trying to do a squeeze.
So they're preparing a squeeze here. So, for example, if a huge amount of Bitcoin is bought all at once, all the short positions get squeezed out, and then Bitcoin just shoots up uncontrollably because so much buying power is generated, with all these treasury companies buying Bitcoin at the same time. I mean, I wouldn't say anything against it. I wouldn't have a problem with that. And now there was something really, really exciting. Ross Ulbricht has now been pardoned by Donald Trump, and he also attended his first Bitcoin conference, where he gave a speech. And the crazy thing is, he just received a donation of 300 Bitcoin. You really have to wrap your head around that. And he also said that Bitcoin was just an idea at the beginning, and now it's become a huge movement. And this movement is what got him out of prison. And now the movement has gone so far that they're even sending him, 300 Bitcoin. And that just shows you that Bitcoin is simply an idea whose time has come. You can't stop it. And you can really see here just how supportive the community is. And I mean, seriously, I think Ross Ulbricht had so many Bitcoin taken from him. If he gets a few Bitcoins back now, I don't think anyone here would hold it against him. I think everyone here would be happy for him.